This movie is about text boxes and word art, which are actually the same thing. And because of that, we're going to look at them together. We'll look at the default behavior. We'll explore some option settings that we can change. We'll look at the formatting that we can apply to the text boxes and word art. So we're going to talk about text boxes and word art. And I'm going to begin by looking at text boxes, but just keep in mind that everything I'm saying about text boxes actually applies also to word art. And this will become clear as we go through the movie. So to insert a text box, left-click Insert, left-click Text Box, hold the left mouse button down to anchor the upper left-hand corner and drag over and release, and you created a text box. Now I mentioned that text boxes and word art are actually the same thing. I'll go one step further than that and say that shapes are also the same thing as text boxes and word art. You almost have the same functionality regardless of what it is that you're dealing with those three objects. So if you saw the movie on shapes, you know what this is. It's a rotation handle. I can hold the shift key down and rotate that and snap it to a grid that is every 15 degrees. I can copy the text box by holding down Control, grabbing the text box and dragging over to another location, release, and I have two text boxes. I can Control C, go to another location, Control V to copy the text box. I can grab the text box on the edge and move it. And after selecting it, and by selecting it, I don't mean this, where you see a dotted line. I mean this, where you see a solid line on the perimeter of the text box. After selecting it, you can delete it by pressing Delete, Delete, Delete. So I'm going to insert another text box by going to the Insert tab, left-clicking Text Box in the text group, and then drawing it out. So the default behavior of the text box is to wrap the text. I can also force a new line of text by pressing the Enter key. And when I click outside the text box, that new line isn't displayed anymore. In a minute, we'll change some option settings so that that doesn't happen. But in the meantime, the text box sort of has a dominant feature or a dominant object on the screen. And by that I mean you can overlay the text box on top of other objects, clip art, charts, pivot charts. And so because of that, it sort of acts as a holder for comments that you might want to make about those other objects. The text box options can be found by selecting the text box, right-clicking it to get the shortcut menu, left-clicking Format Shape, and selecting Text Box from the Format Shape dialog box. From here we have the ability to align the text differently in the box itself, top, bottom, middle, centered in the top, the middle, or the bottom. I'm going to go back to the top, which is the default. We can change the text direction. I'm going to change it back to the default. We can, and this is what I was mentioning earlier, resize the shape to fit the text or allow the text to overflow the shape. So even though those are mutually exclusive options, for some reason you can check both of those boxes. The internal margin selections, which might be known as padding in other circles, is the space between the text and the perimeter of the text box. When we look at the text that's contained in the text box that we currently have on the screen, the text is offset from the top and from the left. This internal margin or padding is what creates that offset. And the checkbox that follows is checked by default, Wrap Text in Shape. That's the default behavior. And lastly, we have the ability to select how many columns that we want in the text box. And we can choose up to 16 columns. And then we can also choose the spacing in between the columns. I'm going to left-click OK. And we convert this text box to display the text in 2 columns instead of just 1. I'm going to close this down. And now I'm going to insert some word art by going to the Insert tab, the text group, selecting word art, and just choosing a text style. So all the things I just mentioned about the text box are true with this word art. If I right-click the word art, left-click Format Shape to get the Format Shape dialog box, I have the same options that I had with the text box. I'm going to close that. Not only that, when I have the word art selected, I get the Drawing Tools Format tab, and I also get the Drawing Tools Format tab when I select the text box. Nothing changed. And with the text box selected, I can edit the shape. I can change the shape to something like, let's pick the heart. I can select the word art. First, I'm going to build a fill color, otherwise you won't see this, and select Change Shape, and change that to a heart. I can select the text in the text box and apply a word art style. Let's pick one we can actually see. And I can change the text that's in the word art in the same sort of way. Left click off of that. And these choices that I have to change the style, to change the fill color, add a picture, a gradient, put a border around the shape, and all these different options I have for shape effects, I also have with the text box. And again, all of these options are also displayed for shapes. There is one interesting text effect that I want to point out. I'm going to select the text in the word art, and that is transformation. You can get some interesting effects here. Some of them you can't actually even read, but it sort of has a uniform distortion of the text that, might serve somebody's purpose, depending upon what you're trying to do. And obviously, of course, you can do the same thing with the text box text. So we took a look at text boxes and word art. We talked about how the fact that text boxes, word art, and shapes are really interchangeable for the most part. We looked at the default behavior of the text as you're typing it into a text box. You'll find the same thing to be true in the word art. And we looked at the option settings for the text boxes, which also apply to the word art. We looked at formatting, and when it comes down to it, that's really the difference between your starting point with a text box versus word art is the formatting that's applied. But you can convert a text box to some word art and vice versa by just changing and adjusting the formatting options.